All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Illuminated Conversations. I'm Dr. Emily Hedberg, a senior consultant with the Lumen team, and I'm joined by two of my colleagues, Dr. Megan Broger, Lumen's founder and president, and Donnie Hobbs, a senior consultant on the team as well. So hello to the both of you.
Hello.
Hello.
So these illuminated conversations really came from some internal dialogue that we had as a team, some observations based on what we're seeing as we engage with teams and leaders. And we thought, why not share that with others who are in the space of leadership development, either for themselves or sit in people leader positions where they're helping to influence and drive the development of other people. So today's conversation really came from some recent leadership academy that we have led in some conversations as we help to develop skills around, how to provide as well as receive feedback effectively. And when we think about feedback, that's both, providing positive feedback as well as constructive areas of opportunity. And what we've really seen is that feedback can either drive growth and connection or can be a source of stress and disengagement on a team or in a dyad. And while feedback is often framed as a skill, something that we help people learn and develop and grow in over time, at its core, it's really a nervous system event. So here at the Lumen Group, we bring the science of people to work. So really integrating psychology, neuroscience, and biology to understand how we can be more effective and how we learn as well as lead. And so today, as we think about this idea of giving and receiving feedback, if we know that it's deeply influenced by things like stress, emotions, our physiological state, we'll talk about, why this conversation matters when feedback can sometimes go awry from a nervous system regulation perspective. And again, how we can help leaders navigate that more effectively. And when we talk about this idea of leaders, we mean leaders at all levels. So whether that's an individual contributor, a people leader, an executive in an organization, we really see the importance of how we all impact a culture of feedback, one that can be felt more like an opportunity for growth and connection rather than a threat. So with that, I wanted to start the conversation by talking about why feedback can be so difficult. Both types of feedback, right? Positive as well as constructive feedback, and why for some that can really feel like a threat. So Megan, I'm curious to hear from you, patterns maybe you have observed and how leaders and teams struggle with giving or receiving feedback, and observations in some of the work that you've done.
Yeah, thanks, Emily. And again, welcome everyone. As you mentioned, at Lumen, we try to ground everything in neuroscience, biology, psychology. So to answer the question, I'm going to start there. And really more likely on the constructive side of things, this becomes really relevant in that our brains can often perceive constructive feedback as a threat, as more of a social threat. And because our brains are wired to protect us from a variety of different dangers, feedback, especially that feels more critical, it's delivered poorly or just constructive. Maybe it's delivered well, but we're not in the right space to take it in, or the person delivering it is not someone who we feel comfortable with. Um, any kind of information like that can be a trigger for us that we are now feeling threatened in some way, and we might need to protect ourselves against that because our brain is sending us a signal that, our main mission is now to provide protection and to really preserve our wellness. And it's not as though, somebody is physically coming at us, but our brain perceives that conversation and those messages in just the same way. And so if we are feeling like we're in that threatened state, then we're going to have a very difficult time taking in not only the content of the feedback, but what we need to do with that information. And so a really helpful model that we often use to kind of bring this to light in our coaching and especially in our leadership development academies as well, comes from an organization called the Neuro Leadership Institute. And the model is called SCARF, and it's a social model. It's an acronym, but it's a model to help us understand how social interactions can trigger either threat responses or reward responses, and helps us understand again that the same parts of our brain that would protect us from a car zooming towards us or a bear chasing us, same parts of our brain get activated when we feel like we're in socially threatening situations. And so the SCARF model really helps to kind of boil all that down for people. And the acronym stands for status, so the extent to which I feel like I'm kind of where I am in my relation to other people, kind of in the social hierarchy of things, if you will. So the C stands for certainty, so my ability to understand and take in information about what's happening, what will happen next, and my clarity of things. A stands for autonomy, so the sense that I have some agency, some influence, some independence in the situation. And R stands for relatedness, so my sense of connection to other people, and F stands for fairness. So my sense of being treated fairly, objectively, or equitably. And so if you think about those five things, status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness, and some of the kinds of messages that can come through, particularly in constructive feedback conversations, we have the potential to either trigger or for the receiver of that feedback be triggered by those messages, causing, a very reflexive biological process to get in the way of the conversation.
And I think that's a helpful way to frame it, Megan, and particularly those potential social threats.
Yep.
As folks registered for today's conversation, we asked them to talk about some of the challenges that they might face or have, observed, and some of the things you're describing, right? The ability to simply say the words I want to convey, but when I worry too much about the response on the receiving end, right? How that's going to impact the person. Someone else shared something similar, maybe that fear of disappointing the other person, or that by offering that constructive feedback, will that impact the relationship in some way, right? That relatedness piece you're talking about. Also, maybe that giving timely feedback and not waiting, even though the person might not be ready for it. Or if we're on the receiving end of feedback, maybe being too eager to say, yep, okay, without further maybe clarifying or just really understanding the feedback that's being given. So I'm wondering, Donnie, as you think about even some of those challenges or examples that were shared, how does nervous system responses show up in feedback conversations?
Yeah, I think that's such a good question because it's not a concept that comes up as we think about, how do I give effective feedback? But your nervous system is one of the loudest tools in the room when you are there presenting feedback and people are picking up on, your nonverbal cues and your energy. And they're drawing conclusions based on that first and foremost. So it's so critical for leaders and managers to be regulated as they step into these conversations. And I think going back to the kind of the brain science of leadership and feedback, our brains are wired up to help us avoid pain and discomfort. And so often one of the things that we see is a high level of avoidance. People don't like to give feedback because they do the cost benefit analysis. And it's like, well, it could be helpful for this person, but it could be painful for me. And then going back to what you were saying, Emily, is sometimes if we're uncertain how someone will respond, we fill in the blanks. And usually that's with uh, kind of a more of a painful um, negative outcome rather than, yeah, I think they'll really appreciate uh, this feedback. I think it could really help them. And so we avoid that. And, same goes the other way too. We avoid seeking feedback for the same reason. We don't want to make somebody else feel uncomfortable or maybe receive feedback that could be what our brains might interpret as a threat. So I think, yeah, nervous system regulation is really key in that sends the loudest message of all, in that you're letting folks know things are okay here. And but are you in a place where you can take in some feedback? Is really a very collaborative process and an inviting process that you can engage in and repeat once you establish kind of that foundation of what feedback could look like.
I think that it makes me consider too, Donnie, when we presented that training and really that element of our nervous system or the role our nervous
Mm,
system has, some of the leaders were like, yeah, I hadn't considered that before. But I think it also provided them some tools and language to know that, hey, what my body's doing is protective in nature.
mhm,
It might not always be helpful, might not always influence the outcomes I want, but it's protective. And so the more we can better understand or have that awareness of our own reactions, the potential reactions of others, helps us to access those skills and to know, the right things to say, but also how that's coming across.
mhm,
Curious for the two of you, if we think about if we can have that awareness and really shift into more of a regulated state to be able to have those feedback conversations, how might that impact the outcome, both as the one delivering feedback and those on the receiving end of it?
mhm. Megan, you have any
Yeah,
thoughts?
I'm happy to jump in. I think on either side, as you just said, Emily, as the feedback giver or the feedback receiver, it's helpful to understand what the impacts of being dysregulated are, as it relates to effective feedback conversations. And in general, when our nervous system is in dysregulation, we are far less likely to be able to regulate our emotions, and that can both be in the tone of voice, as well as our nonverbal behaviors and that emotional expression. We can often have a reduction in our ability to access our cognitive functioning, the good, big thinking, and strategizing part of our brain that's often really helpful when we're trying to be very, very clear, very concise, and hopefully very supportive in these feedback conversations. And so if we don't have full access to that cognitive bucket of skills where we have all of our, our training and our strategies and our experience, that's problematic. And it's also on the receiving side of things, if we're dysregulated, we're going to be far less just resilient and able to kind of take in, feel that initial kind of, ooh, but then bounce back and get curious and really try to hear and make use of that information. So if we have less emotional regulation, less ability to access our skills and strategies, our cognitive abilities, and we're less resilient, those three things don't help
Mm.
us when we're either delivering or receiving feedback.
Mhm. Yeah, that's great. I think it's so interesting. Our bodies are always communicating with us. They're always sending little messages, and sometimes those messages get bigger and louder. So if you even just take 15 seconds right now and check in with your body, what do you notice? What is your body trying to tell you? And there might be a little tension here or there, or maybe you need to shift, or uh, you know, maybe it's calling for your attention in some way. And when we don't pay attention to those cues, they can get louder. And when that happens, it can trigger the nervous system activation. And when the nervous system gets activated, uh, one word that I really like just to kind of describe how our whole process responds is that everything narrows. Our communication narrows, our creativity narrows, vocabulary, decision making, everything just kind of funnels down, which leaves us, really limited as far as how we can effectively communicate, especially in a challenging conversation. Not that feedback is challenging by nature, but can be. And so finding ways to kind of re-regulate the system, open up those channels again, open up that capacity and the communication, the creativity, and the curiosity. I think that's one of the big things that can go away if we're not listening to the cues of our body, and the
Mm.
body keeps saying, we're not hearing, or you're not hearing, what we're asking for. There must be some sort of a threat. And we get into that narrowed space. So yeah, regulation is really key.
And
Yeah,
you
I think that's
mentioned,
really, oh, go ahead, Emily.
no, go ahead.
That's really helpful that you bring that up, Donnie, because I think that's something that we hear so often now from either coaches or people in our leadership academies is that, there can be that frustration where they learn ways of having effective feedback conversations or receiving feedback effectively. And then in the moments that they need it most, they're like, why can't I be
Hmm.
effective? I know what to do. I have the skills. And it is this pairing of that nervous system
Mm.
awareness and then the ability to regulate in the moment so that we can still access those skills and that we see kind of again and again as kind of the hidden barrier to people feeling like they can actually be more effective.
Yeah, you both raise an important point around the need to be aware of when that's
Mhm.
happening, right? When I'm starting to get dysregulated. Donnie, you mentioned this idea of even just checking in. Or Megan, yours example, right? If I'm getting frustrated or I'm noticing some of that tension, that's starting to build awareness of something's happening physiologically. Curious if there's other ways that people can really start to recognize when that stress response is starting to be activated in those types of feedback conversations.
Hmm. Yeah, I think part of it is just getting into the habit of checking in. And then once you do start checking in, it's really kind of amazing how much information your body is sending your way. And a lot of times people will say, you know, I don't know that I'm anxious or that I'm nervous about something, and they'll be talking about it like it's this, really cognitive component or process. And so we just stop and we just do check in. And they're like, oh yeah, actually, and it becomes such a normal part of their process. They're like, yeah, my stomach is really tight or my chest is really tight. But it's kind of always like that. And so it's helpful just to start to whether that's setting a timer on your watch or creating a regular rhythm to just be able to step back, pull over, take those little breaks throughout the day just to see where am I at? What do I need right now
Mm.
to kind of come back into that centered or grounded space? So that's one thing that people have found really helpful. And in talking with a number of clients, they say the same thing. It's like it really comes down to remembering to do it
Mm.
because it's easy to kind of hit the snooze alarm or silence
Yeah.
those bodily indicators.
Yeah.
Hmm. And I think that that very thing that you just said there, the bodily indicators, for a lot of people, recognizing, I think, and tuning into the physiological response, that's a lot easier for people than
Hmm.
recognizing when cognitively they've been kind of hijacked and they're no longer,
Right.
they are narrow. That can take a little bit longer to gain awareness around. So yeah, getting curious about how might my body be telling me, even if I
Mm.
don't
Hmm.
cognitively know? So, do I feel like my palms are itchy? Is my face getting flushed? Do I have, that feeling in my stomach? What are some of the kind of physical indicators that we can really begin to pay attention to in terms of our self-awareness? And then, as we are the feedback giver, getting curious about other people's behaviors as well. Are they really, kind of starting to shift around? Are they turning red? Are they beginning to
Mm.
avoid eye contact? What are the things that we might be able to pick up on from somebody else that could give us the opportunity to say, hey, let's pause for a second. Where are you at? What's going on? So that we can stay in that more productive zone of conversation.
Yeah, I really
Yeah.
like that, Megan, the idea of just pausing and being in the moment and being aware, having audience awareness, whether you're giving a presentation or feedback. Sometimes we get so wrapped up into our own process of, how we're doing that we fail to recognize how other people are taking in what we're sharing. And that's great just to have that dual awareness of, hey, what's going on for me, but also what's going on for this person. And we don't know, right? When we see those flushes or we see,
Mm.
the shift in the chair, we don't know what's going on. And so without intentional conversation around what's coming up for you right now or how's this going, we don't know. And again, we go back to our brains fill in the blanks. We make assumptions, and often, maybe most often, those assumptions are off or unhelpful.
Yeah, not always accurate to the situation or the
Hmm.
intention behind the conversation. But I think you're both posing this importance of, as the leader or the one providing feedback, it's important that we remain grounded and centered so that we can have that other awareness. How is this going? How is it landing? Do we need to take a little bit of a pause on that conversation to really process what's happening right now? And so often coming into that becomes then, okay, so if I can have that awareness and I recognize something's happening, what do I do with that? What's a skill that can be helpful? So at Lumen, we really believe in micro strategies can really have a big impact in helping to shift our nervous systems in those moments. So I'm going to share with you all just a quick evidence-based breathing technique called the physiological sigh. I'll explain what it is. We'll do an exercise together. I'm going to invite you to join along, and then we'll talk about how that might be used within the context of feedback and perhaps other techniques that Megan and Donnie might have to offer as well, things that can help us to remain grounded and centered as that leader so that it can be an effective and productive conversation. So the physiological sigh is a way that we can, again, really shift or just engage the nervous system a bit differently when we're stressed or there's that maybe social threat that's happening, helping us to really engage more of that ability to kind of that rest and digest, to stay calm and open, not restricted in our perspective. So with this, we're going to do a double inhale through our nose, followed by a slow exhale through our mouth. And what this does in our body is helps to offload some of that excessive or excess carbon dioxide, helps us to slow our heart rate, and again, bring us more into that regulated state. So how we do this is we're going to do a deep inhale through our nose, a second smaller inhale at the top of that breath, and then a slow exhale fully through our mouth, much like a deep sigh, right? That sending that signal to our body and our nervous system, like we're okay. We're not in a threat mode right now. Before we do a couple of rounds of that together, I'm going to ask you to recall or bring to mind a time when you've received feedback that was difficult to hear or had to deliver feedback that the potential for it being difficult for the other person to hear was present. And as you imagine that situation, and if maybe closing your eyes could be helpful for you to recall it, to think about your immediate reaction in that moment. Also, maybe noticing what you felt in your body, in your mind as that was occurring. And as you have that example, I'm going to run us through 3 cycles of that breathing. So again, I'm going to have you do a deep inhale through your nose, a second smaller inhale at the top of that breath, and a slow exhale through your mouth. Taking another deep inhale through your nose, a quick second inhale, and then exhale slowly, allowing that full breath to leave your lungs. Do one more cycle of a deep inhale through your nose, a second smaller inhale at the top of that breath, and to exhale slowly and fully through your mouth. So if you had your eyes closed, you can go ahead and open them. But I'm curious, and I would love to hear from you all. If you participated in the activity, feel free to drop into the chat what you noticed, the beginning of the exercise, maybe during or even after. But Donnie or Megan, I'd invite a little bit of your perspective. What did you notice as you engaged in that breathing exercise?
You want to go, Danny?
I was just going to say just a down shifting.
Mm,
It felt with each breath, it was like a gear down. And yeah, it just felt really nice, grounding, and kind of a sense. I know we use the word centering, centered a lot, but just kind of a feeling of being more centered here
Mm-hmm.
and just grounded. Yeah, it was nice.
yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, when you kind of asked us to bring to mind an experience either of giving feedback that we thought when we might be met with some resistance or receiving feedback that was hard to hear, my mind went to the former, and it just really helped to clarify how much kind of anticipatory
Mm,
dysregulation that we can experience and leaders and supervisors might experience just stepping into a conversation where they need to give some, information that might be hard to hear because we don't know how other people are going to react. And so that's part of that certainty
yeah.
threat. We're stepping into
Mm,
these conversations and we don't know what the response is going to be. And so, how helpful it would be to do one of these micro strategies as you're stepping into that conversation. So you're priming your nervous system, at least to begin, from more of a regulated state, as opposed to what is likely that kind of higher anticipatory dysregulation because of the uncertainty you're stepping into that with.
yeah, I think that's
Hmm.
so important how we can set ourselves up and how even just, 30 seconds can really shift in the way we're able to effectively communicate and facilitate a more effective conversation.
Mhm.
I think this could also be something, during feedback, if maybe challenges arise or, we need to take a collective pause, that can help us to really create enough of a time to allow us to kind of reframe or reset. And even after feedback, I think for some of us, feedback in general can just be a little bit more challenging. It's more taxing on our bodies. And so to really give us some space to discharge what's no longer needed after
Mhm.
those types
Hmm.
of conversations.
Real quick, Emily, you just made me think of I was connecting with a past coachee, and they shared that this round of kind of mid-year performance conversations that they had, they set the expectation with each of their staff members that halfway through the 30-minute conversation, they set a timer for 15 minutes. They just took 1 minute pause. We're just going to take a time
Mm,
out. Regardless of how things are going, we're just going to pause and we're going to each do some deep breathing or whatever we feel like we need to do, and then we'll move forward. So it's that, um, how can you again kind of build in some of those micro strategies, either proactively or reactively, as it might be helpful.
yeah. What a great example. And also as a leader, right? You're kind of setting the expectation for the conversation, what
Yeah.
they can anticipate, but also knowing that it's okay to take a little bit of a pause to
Yeah.
just
Hmm.
Collect
do
your
what's
thoughts,
needed.
regulate
Yeah.
your energy. Yeah, whatever it is.
Yeah. As you all think about that, some of these simple or small shifts that can be made, what do you see as being really the impact of that? What's the outcome when we take that time to be intentional?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think for me, it goes back to that idea of agency or autonomy, Megan, that you were talking about, in that we have influence over how we feel. And I think sometimes when we think about a feedback conversation or a challenging conversation, uh, our nervous system starts to register that, oh, this conversation or this person is going to make me feel a certain way. And so knowing that we can come back and we can choose how we go into that conversation and we can choose how we show up in that
Mm,
conversation can feel really grounding and regulating as well. So just conceptually, it gives us some power back or some sense of control where uncertainty might be trying to creep in.
mm. Yeah, that's a helpful way to frame it. We can't control how other people are going to respond or react. We might be able to influence that by way of the things that we're
Hmm.
doing, but for ourselves to get maybe some of that sense of certainty or control in this situation can be really powerful. Well,
Hmm.
I'm recognizing we're coming to the close of our half an hour. These always go even more quickly than, we envision. So with that, I'm going to invite for those of you who are live here on the call today to drop into the chat. What's one thing that you're going to walk away from with today's conversation, maybe something you might try. And as we're waiting for some of those responses to come in, Megan and Donnie, anything else you would like to leave our participants with here today?
Oh, well, that's perfect that you just shared that because I think as we experienced with the exercise you led us through, Emily, it doesn't take long. to have a pretty powerful reset, or just kind of, as you said, Donnie, kind of a downshift. And whether it's feedback or whether it's just moving more productively through the thing that comes next on our schedule, that these micro strategies, micro breaks can be really powerful. And there's a quick tool if you don't already have some in your pocket that you can grab and try.
And if you scan the QR code at the left, it will populate to a link of some strategies here that you can download and use. It's always great, at least for me, to have that visual around my space and office. So even maybe could be a great primer as you're stepping into some of those conversations. Donnie, anything else you would add or want to share?
I don't think so. I think, well, just to reiterate, going back to, I think it comes back to just remembering to check in, remembering to use the tools, trying them on, seeing which ones work for you. And I mean, they're usually pretty simple and easy to apply. You can use them even in the middle of a meeting without others knowing. But find a couple tools that you want to try on, and yeah, just remember to check in and remember to practice.
Awesome. And appreciate some folks sharing in the chat here. Yeah, gonna envision receiving or giving feedback more regularly so I can recognize my own reactions. So we don't have to wait for the moment where we're in the, receiving end of feedback, but to think about, maybe what are some situations recently and how did that really arise in practicing some of these skills. Awesome. Well, again, we want to thank you all for spending some time in your day with us here at the Lumen Group. We're hopeful that you could take away some of these insights or information and help to apply them even later today if you have some conversations to be had. So I hope you all take care and we'll talk again soon.